Welcome to Lab Life with the Air Force Research Laboratory.
Hi, I'm Michelle.
And I'm Kenneth. Today we are speaking with John Hoffman, the Information Systems Security Manager at the DoD Supercomputer Center here at AFRL. He was an aspiring video game program developer who instead decided to keep government supercomputers safe.
In 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, John.
Thank you.
So starting things off here for our viewers, they kind of want to get a feel for what you do exactly. So before we kind of dive in, can you tell us, in terms of supercomputers, that raises a lot of questions, is it kind of like what we see in the movies, or what is the reality of working with one?
So the movies don't get it exactly right. The movies, because they're a visual medium, really want to show you kind of what the internet looks like, what the computers look like. So they'll create all these fancy GUIs and make it real easy to interact with the system. In reality, when you're dealing with a supercomputer, it's all command line, Linux-based system. So you really need to know how to type out the commands, work with it that way. And there are some applications where you can open up a GUI and kind of visualize your data, but for the most part, it's just text.
Okay, so your day-to-day then, kind of diving into that, is much more working behind the scenes, not with, like you said, fancy displays popping out everywhere.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so kind of going along that line then, starting a little farther back, what brought you into the world of working in computer security, or even getting to where you're at now?
So originally I started off in college, I wanted to be a programmer. I got hired in by the Air Force to do software development, and through that I found out that I wasn't really developing software securely. There were a lot of different functions I was using that could be exploited. So I moved from programming to secure programming. And then from there, it started to expand my mission. I started looking at, well, what are we doing with our web servers here at the DSRC? What are we doing with some of the applications that we have running on the system, and how to secure those? And from learning all about that, I eventually moved into doing security full-time and dropping kind of the programming part of my job. And eventually I was an information systems security officer, and then I became the manager.
Okay, so in the beginning you weren't planning on working in security, just like you mentioned, more of a program.
Correct.
And do you find this field more enriching, or is it something you enjoy more than what you were working on?
So I do enjoy it more. It's a much broader job, so I get to work not only with securing the computer, but I get to learn about the facilities as well, the network, and try to understand how that all comes together in order to protect it.
Okay, that's, fascinating. A lot of people do worry about, especially nowadays, security. So let's say somebody comes up to you and says, hey, how do I make my computer more secure at home? Do you have any tips and tricks or things you've learned along the way to even just do basic security for people?
So the DoD puts out a thing called the STIGs, the Security Technical Implementation Guidelines. And these STIGs will tell you kind of how to administer your computer, certain settings you may wish to turn off. And that's a good starting point to try to harden your system. Now, as a home user, I would not recommend just blindly following all those recommendations, because that could hinder what you're trying to do in your system. But that would be a good way to start.
Okay, cool. And I imagine you may get that question a lot from family members.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. I took not much programming in school, but enough for my family is like, oh, you're the guy who can go to this for good old troubleshooting, right?
Yep.
So I feel that. Kind of going back to supercomputers then, specifically, what makes it super? Like, what makes it better than a normal computer?
So a supercomputer really contains all the hardware, software that's commercial off the shelf. The processors are Intel processors, it's normal RAM, hard drives. You could buy all those pieces online or in a store. What brings it together is the fast interconnect and the software that resides on top of the operating system in order to use that interconnect. So within a supercomputer, we generally look, when we're purchasing, to get a system that has under 2.5 microseconds latency end-to-end.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
so that makes sense.
Yes, and if I have if I remember correctly, when you're talking latency, especially on the internet, if you were to put a strand of fiber between New York and LA and have it straight line of sight up in the air, I think it's around 30 milliseconds end-to-end latency that you could go from New York to LA.
Jeez.
So that's pretty slow. So that's milliseconds, 10 to the negative third. We're talking 10 to the negative 12th power.
Okay, well that definitely does literally quantify that so we can see. So going along those lines, a lot of people may not have known that you can just build a supercomputer with off-the-shelf parts. What are some other misconceptions that you've heard about supercomputers that you'd like to air out now?
So a lot of times when people think supercomputers, they think that, oh, it's, you can put things together, you can run a distributed system, and then you can make your own kind of homegrown supercomputer. It really revolves around having to have that fast interconnect, that software that uses the interconnect to be able to call it a supercomputer, because you can still do other systems of distributed computing.
Okay, gotcha. And in terms of a lot of the power we have here, working with a computer this large or this, like you mentioned, how fast it is, who are your normal clients or people who would use this computer for simulations?
So our clients pretty much are any DoD researcher. So we have in-house DoD researchers, we have those that are partners in academia, the defense industry base. They all have access to our systems to run their calculations.
Okay, and is it only them, or could, let's say, a civilian who may have a project have to apply a different way?
No, it has to be a DoD contract.
Okay, gotcha, that makes sense. And in terms of using these contracts then, can these vary from months on, or can they lease these things for years to use?
So every year we have our allocations that we hand out to the different services. So 30% of our system goes towards Air Force, 30 Navy, 30 Army, and 10% general DoD use. So each service has a service agent who will help decide, okay, well, this program over here who's doing, flight data, they get to have so many millions of computational hours to use throughout the year. And they can then use that. At the end of the year, if they still need more resources, they can get those resources back the following year. And all these resources are free to the DoD to use.
That's amazing. Going along those lines then, let's say these sound like these computers do get a lot of work. What is the average life cycle for a supercomputer you guys run with?
So when we get the systems in, they're set for a 4-year life cycle.
Okay.
So we buy the first year plus 3 optional years, and at the end of those years, by that time the hardware's old. It may not be, the chips may not be manufactured anymore. So the cost to repair the systems as they have issues continues to go up. So at that point, we will retire the system and then offer it to the DoD academia partners that if they want to take the system from us, they can, but at no cost, but they have to then have a facility that can support it.
That makes sense. And I imagine these things have to draw a lot of power to keep them running.
Yeah, so each of the systems, because of the limited power that we have, because we just don't have infinite power to draw from.
Yeah.
When we put the call out to buy a new supercomputer, we limit it to 2 megawatts per system.
Okay, got it.
And our facility can support up to 4 systems, so you're talking about 8 megawatts of power that we can support at one time.
And if I recall, I remember I took a tour of the facility with you. You had a huge, was it battery bank?
Yes.
Okay, and how does that work exactly to help power everything?
So the battery bank is part of our uninterrupted power supply. The batteries will provide power for the system for up to 5 minutes. And then outside our facility, we actually have diesel generators that will kick on and take over that load in about 30 seconds. So once those things are on and running, we can actually maintain power to the facility as long as we get fuel delivered to the systems indefinitely.
Well, that's wonderful. So you have a good fail-safe just
Exactly.
in case. So kind of going back to what you do day to day, is your job, you'd say, being the security system manager, more, you say, proactive, reactive, or is it just kind of monitoring and making sure everything stays cool?
I would say it's a little bit of both. Part of our requirement for security, we have to do weekly scans, analyze those scans, see where we're missing, see if anything became misconfigured. With these systems that we have, when you do any type of upgrades, sometimes the operating system, when you upgrade that, likes to revert settings back to a previous state. Ooh. So we always want to make sure we catch those issues and fix them before it could affect the users. Also, could be more reactive if something happens. Let's say a 0-day vulnerability gets announced and it's in the wild. Now I have to respond to that.
Okay, and that's something, so it's never anything, like too many things out of left field, you'd say, per day. It's pretty, hopefully at least, like pretty well set. Like I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do this scan. I know how to deal with this thread. It's
correct, yes.
Okay.
It's only those 0 days that catch us every now and then.
Yeah,
but that's sense for anyone out there on the internet.
Going along those lines then with security, that's as you know, with technology evolving, that's also changing. So is there courses you have to keep up with, or is there just your expertise? Is it just you learn every day, or how do you keep yourself up to date?
So part of the DoD requirement to be an information system security manager, I have to follow the directive that is 8140, or the cybersecurity workforce. Okay. That requires me to have a computer security certificate, so I'm a certified information system security professional. And in order to maintain that certification, I have to take so many continuous learning classes per year, whether it be a SANS class, whether it be certified ethical hacking, or any other program out there in order to maintain my skills.
That makes sense. And what would you say is, at least recently, is there something that you could impart upon our viewers that's a super important issue that you think should be maybe brought up more in terms of security?
I would say pen testing. That really needs to be a focus, part of your security plan. It's great that you can follow the recommended guidelines in order how to secure a system, put the firewalls in place. But if you don't have a knowledge of how to actually attack from the outside to try to mimic what an actual threat would be, then you really can't prove that you're secure.
That's true. You said that was called pen testing?
Yeah, penetration testing.
Oh, gotcha, that makes sense. Okay, cool, I was not familiar, so that makes sense. So are there programs then that could have you simulate your defenses, like a firewall, for instance, against an attack? Or is that just something you said you do research on to better understand?
So I do research to better understand it. There are tools out there that you can use. One of my favorite tools is Kali Linux.
Okay.
It's a great little CD distribution that you can load up. It has a bunch of different tools in it that you can attack a system with. Of course, just don't go attacking any system.
That makes sense.
I do it on my network to my systems as part of the testing.
Yeah, that could be startling otherwise.
Correct, and very illegal.
Yes. Okay, that's wonderful. So we kind of talked earlier about what got you into the kind of programming, but let's say in your childhood then, like what brought you into wanting to be a computer programmer?
Video games, definitely.
I can agree with that.
I wanted to be a video game programmer, and when I was looking to go into college and learning how to program, I got to actually become familiar with a couple developers from the Turbine Game Studios. And I was talking with the lead developer of a game called Ashwin's Call, and she's like, hey, you want to be a computer programmer, you want to program video games, that's fine, but here, read my blog because we have a high burnout rate. And as I was reading her description of what she's gone through, what her studio's gone through, and within the industry of being about a 2-year burnout rate, I was like, that's not something I want to be a part of anymore.
No.
I was like, I would rather have a more steady job. So I went from looking at trying to program video games to doing more just general software development, web development.
Okay, gotcha. So that being your passion then, or at least where it started, have you had a chance to maybe work on any like indie titles or still work with games, or do you kind of just play them and enjoy them?
I just play them, enjoy them, but I have several friends that I've grown up with who are now developers, so every now and then I get to talk to them, see what they're doing.
That's cool.
And I've had a chance to play a few games that were still in development, but other than that, yeah, I really haven't done any game development.
Hey, still got to be a tester though, so that's neat.
Exactly.
When your friends and family ask what you're doing then, you pretty have a job at least that's describable in a pretty easy way. How do you pitch it to people, let's say in a professional setting, when they say, hey, with security, what do you do exactly with supercomputers?
I would say my job mostly revolves around having to interact with all the different departments in order to secure the entire facility, not just the computers, but the HVAC systems, the water supply, the electrical and power facility. So I work with the physical security people in order to make sure that the building's locked down correctly. I work with the sysadmins to make sure that they're applying the correct STIGs, allowing them to make sure that they harden the systems in order to follow all the guidance set out by the DoD. I work with the information assurance folks to understand what information is on the systems, because different information may require different protection.
Okay, so you're much more than just software. You do have physical security you worry about as well.
Correct, yep.
Okay, I wasn't aware that's part of the job. So would you say, what's the split then working with these supercomputer software versus, like you said, more building security?
For my personal day-to-day, I'm dealing, I would say, 80% of my job is more dealing with the hardware, software of the system.
Okay.
I really don't do too much physical because there is a separate department that does physical security, but I work with them to ensure that all our documentation, all our scheduled weekly audits are completed.
That makes sense. So going more into or back to the system itself that you're protecting, what would you say is some of the biggest triumphs or greatest moments you'd have from working here with the supercomputers?
Back in about, I think it was 2017, the Department of Defense released a new memo saying that we will migrate from an old type accreditation system to the new risk management framework, which is developed by NIST. It's their special publication 800. And so my center, I was the first person to go under this new method of securing the systems in my DoD program that I am a part of.
Okay.
So we were the first ones to be evaluated. We actually had a very good evaluation. We learned a lot of different techniques we might need to apply, different areas that we need to focus on that we may not have focused on in the past.
Oh, that's fantastic. But I saw as well in terms of success stories, I heard there's an anthrax protection program you guys worked on.
That was a really interesting program. In the wild, if a soldier was exposed to anthrax, in order to help fight the infection, you'd have to take a sample of the anthrax, grow it in a petri dish, test it against different antibiotics in order to know what to give that soldier.
Yeah.
Well, what they've been able to do is taking photographs under a microscope of these anthrax spores and looking at the different physical characteristics. And they were able to take about 16 or 18 physical characteristics and whittle it down to 6 that they need to focus on. And then they know, based on those 6 characteristics, what antibiotic to use. So therefore, you're talking going from maybe about 48 hours down to almost immediately being able to start the treatment.
Well, that's amazing. So, and this is something you guys would run through the supercomputers in conjunction with them, or is this just a test to see if they have the framework for it?
So this was the researchers doing the research on our system.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you were saying they were calling you, like saying, we have a case, could you run this real quick? But that makes more sense.
Yeah, so we don't provide any, we don't run any of the research, so we just enable the researchers to use the systems.
That's awesome. So other than that, when it comes to simulations then or other programs you've run, what would you say is the largest or most ambitious program you guys have ran before?
So it may not be the largest, but one of the most ambitious ones, we were recently working with a company who had a toolkit called the Systems Toolkit. And this toolkit allowed you to kind of maybe design like satellite constellations in order to fulfill some mission.
Yeah.
This system was only used on Windows desktop computers. And the company was looking to expand it to Linux and specifically supercomputers and how they can use it to do more robust data calculations, do it faster. I was teamed up with a group over at AFIT, and my center assisted them in moving the system from Windows to Linux and onto the supercomputers. And what we found out in one of the test cases, the researcher was able to do his research in 3 days compared to 88 years on his desktop computer. So you're talking 80 years down to 3 days.
That's huge.
And not only that, but with his assignment, if they just want to make get 100% of all the requirements, this thing would have cost about $3 billion annually.
Oh my God.
But by doing literally millions of calculations, looking at how they can adjust it from geosynchronous orbit to low Earth orbit to ground-based stations and find the proper configuration to lower the cost, he was able to say, hey, I can provide a solution at 95% that's only $1 billion a year.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, you touched on, in terms of success stories, I've also seen a lot for dollar savings, and that is a testament to it. That's
Exactly.
incredible. So is that kind of a big thing you can tell people then, saying if you literally want to save time and money, like you can work with us?
Oh, absolutely. Every year, we give these cycles out for free, and the research that can be done on them really saves time. One of the big things that we do is flight testing on our systems.
Okay.
So in order to do a flight test, you're talking about a good number of years ago, you'd have to develop a model. You'd have to schedule time in the wind tunnel. You have to put the model in the wind tunnel, see if it works. And in order to get that time in the wind tunnel, you're talking 6 months, maybe a year out. And those models can cost, tens of thousands of dollars. And if you put the model in and you find it doesn't work, well, now you need to go back to the drawing board, develop a new model, wait another 6 months, develop another $10,000 model, push that in there. Well, you can do that all in the supercomputer at once. And you can adjust the parameters, run it multiple times over the day and see what works. And if you have something that works on the computers, you can actually then say, okay, well, this is probably the correct solution. Let's go ahead and make just one model of this, test it out without having to waste all that time and money.
That makes sense. So kind of going more into the system as well, let's say if you had a dream scenario where you could run anything you want on the system. Is there any simulation, software, or something you'd want to do given the chance?
Two things I would say I'd like to do. Again, and the supercomputers are not necessarily good for this because they don't have a lot of GPUs.
Yeah.
But I would like to see just how much Bitcoin mining I could do on the system. That would be one.
That would be interesting.
The next thing I'd like to do is some of that deep learning that Google has with their applications, and just to see what I can do with that.
That'd be interesting. Have you been approached about anything along those lines before, or any kind of programming like that?
So some of our researchers have looked into that. I have not worked directly with them,
Okay.
But I know they have been looking at the Google applications in order to do some of that deep learning.
That would be fascinating. So the last question we have before we dip into some fan questions, we've been trying to kind of cover this through most of our guests to get a good feel for just what people enjoy about the Air Force. So I was going to run by you. Do you have any favorite piece of technology that's been produced or made by the Air Force?
I would have to say my favorite piece of technology is the A-10 aircraft. I just love that aircraft. It's reliable, it's cheap to fly, and it can do a lot of damage.
And the sound it makes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I actually was just at the museum today and got to see the A-10. And it's the joke my friend and I always tell is it was just the aircraft built around a gun.
Yep.
Because you can see the inside. It's wonderful. Cool. So we're going to dip into some fan questions now. These were all gathered off social media. So the first one we have is from Arjit Das. He was asking, HPC is expensive. We have community solutions like Hadoop. Is that how it's pronounced?
Yes.
Hadoop. He was saying the Hadoop distributed file system, does it have any place in the computations being done on your side?
So I would say yes, it does. Within supercomputing, there's kind of two schools of thought. You have one type of calculations where you have maybe a small job you need to run, but you need to tweak the parameter a million times, where you don't necessarily have to rely on that fast system interconnect to get it done. And so something like Hadoop could be set up, in your lab environment to where you can distribute the data over, 100 different servers and get those calculations completed. However, we also have systems where they're trying to do flight testing. So you're talking about taking maybe, let's say, an airframe and having 1 million points on it, and you're trying to fly that aircraft in this virtual environment. And each point on that aircraft is another compute core. Okay. And those different cores have to talk to each other in real time, and you need that fast interconnect in order to properly simulate that aircraft.
The next question we have then is from Sir Robert Brooks Othament from Brick, it looks like Brick House Ltd. In what ways will the further spread of the fog or mist computing and embedded wetware human domain systems irrevocably change the age of cybersecurity as we know it?
We're talking really here about the Internet of Things. You have different pieces all over the person, and you're trying to get the data from the human to maybe intermediate systems to eventually the far end. And really, it's going to make us have to look at how we can properly encrypt that data in transit without slowing it down. Because encryption does provide some overhead, and if you're talking literally millions of warfighters out there, all with their little sensors on them, trying to send data all back at once, that could be just too much over a network, and it depends on how robust that network is too. If we can find a way to encrypt them without necessarily slowing it down, that would be a big success.
Okay, and just to explain to some viewers, because I just learned this today, what is fog and mist in comparison to the cloud?
When you're talking about cloud, you're talking about the servers that are in some facility that are away from the user. So you're 30,000 feet up in the air is where the cloud is. The fog and mist are talking about bringing different devices, different servers down to a lower level to where it can interact in between the cloud and the user.
So John, to wrap things up here today, just want to run by you, was there any general security points or tips you had for people before we sign off?
So my tips would be you have to really try to stay up on the different attacks that are out there. Things are constantly changing, new zero-day exploits are happening. Unfortunately, we're seeing that we can no longer trust the hardware. Recently, we've had Spectre and Meltdown, where it shows that the Intel chips are insecure. So when you're talking about trying to secure a system, if anyone has physical access to the system or is on the system, they can exploit those vulnerabilities. So you just have to be more cautious of who you let on sometimes. Also, you have to do a lot more auditing in order to ensure that someone's not doing something nefarious.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Make sure to follow us on social media at Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube at AF Research Lab. And remember, stay curious.
Logging off.